My name's Ethan Grayson, 31, and I analyze other people's financial risks for a living, not my own family's betrayals. The night my father's mansion went up in flames, the fire didn't start in the kitchen. It started in Vivian's hands. I watched her toss a leather folder into the fireplace, her diamond bracelet glinting like a smirk. Inside that folder was my father's will, the one that said I'd inherit everything he built over 40 years. She looked right at me as the paper curled into ash. "Now it's clean," she said. By morning, every account, property, and company share, $100 million was in her control. And I was left with nothing but smoke in my lungs and a signature I'd never get back. What she didn't know was that my father hated digital records. He left trails, handwritten, coded, old school. I just had to find one. I didn't realize yet that the real backup wasn't in a safe or a file. It was in the hands of someone she'd underestimated, someone who made a living uncovering the lies people set on fire. She smiled while everything that had my name on it burned. The flames weren't just orange, they were hungry, alive, swallowing the papers that carried my father's signature, my future, my name. I stood frozen in the doorway, the smell of smoke and polished oak twisting together like a cruel memory. Vivian, my stepmother, didn't scream or panic. She stood in front of the fire, perfectly composed, her silk robe reflecting the glow, lips curling into a smile that made my stomach turn. "Accidents happen," she said softly, eyes never leaving the flames. "Your father's study was always such a fire hazard." I wanted to lunge forward, to grab what was left of the will, but by the time I stepped closer, it was gone. Ash, dust, and silence. The fire department called it an electrical fault. The police agreed. But I knew better. She wanted the paper gone. She wanted me gone. At the funeral, the scent of lilies couldn't hide the rot of hypocrisy. Vivian stood at the podium, black lace veil, crocodile tears, and a voice so polished it made people believe she'd lost more than a husband. When she turned to me, her voice softened, enough for the microphones to catch every word. "My husband always said Ethan was a dreamer," she said. "But dreams don't pay bills, do they?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite, nervous, but it cut deep all the same. My hands clenched around the folded handkerchief in my pocket. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the son no one pitied, the disappointment she'd turned me into. After the service, people drifted away, whispering condolences they didn't mean. Vivian stood near the grave, pretending to pray, her diamond bracelet catching the sun. I walked up beside her. "He trusted you," I said quietly. She didn't even flinch. "He trusted a lot of people, Ethan, and look where that got him." The words hit harder than the dirt thudding against the coffin. That night I returned to what was left of the study. Everything smelled like melted varnish and old secrets. The safe was a blackened shell, the books nothing but curled spines. I crouched near the hearth, brushing through cold ashes with my hands until something sharp caught my thumb. A pen. Half-melted, silver, engraved. E.L., my initials. But it wasn't mine. My father's favorite pen was gold. This one was heavier, colder. I held it under the flashlight, turning it slowly. Then I noticed something strange. Inside the transparent ink reservoir, faint residue shimmered not black or blue, but fluorescent. Curious, I grabbed the small UV inspection light we used at the garage. When the beam hit the pen, hidden ink bled into view, glowing faintly like a secret that refused to die. P.O. Box 9421. I froze. My father didn't keep post office boxes. He hated anything that wasn't face-to-face, paper-to-hand, deal-to-signed handshake. If he'd hidden something in a box, it wasn't business. It was personal. Outside, the rain began again, tapping the window like impatient fingers. The sound mixed with the hum of the UV light was still in my hand. Maybe she'd burned the will. But she hadn't burned everything. And if that box still existed, so did the truth. The clerk looked at me like I was robbing my own ghost. The post office smelled like paper and bleach, too clean for what I was there to find. Rows of metal boxes lined the wall, each one a quiet secret, locked behind brass doors and thin glass. I gave the man at the counter the number, trying to sound casual. "P.O. Box 9421, I said, registered to Edward Layton. He frowned, typing slowly into his old computer. His tie was crooked and his badge read Malcolm. Box expired 3 weeks ago, he said. Contents pending disposal. My stomach tightened. Can I renew it? Or just see what's inside? He squinted. Are you authorized? I'm his son. That got a raised eyebrow. Edward Layton passed away, didn't he? We had a notice. I nodded once. Yeah, that's why I need to check it. For estate matters. He looked at me for a long moment, weighing something behind his dull gray eyes. Funny thing, he muttered. A lady came in last week asking about that same box. Said she was the widow. My pulse jumped. What did she look like? He shrugged. Fancy coat, too much perfume. Didn't have the key either. Got really annoyed when I told her she needed proof of ownership. Said she'd handle it privately. Vivian, of course. She was always 2 steps ahead, or thought she was. I'll file a request, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, pulling out a form. His hand hesitated over the keyboard, then he glanced at me. Wait a second. He reached under the counter and produced a small stack of mail, burned at the corners as if something nearby had caught fire. This was returned from that box just before it expired. Didn't look important, but I set it aside. He handed me the top piece, a postcard. The front showed a foggy coastline, rocky cliffs, and a white lighthouse standing against gray skies. Bar Harbor, Maine. The back read in fading ink. Ed, I found something in the cabin. Call me before she does. H, but the red stamp across it said, Return to sender, undeliverable. No postmark date, no address beyond the box number. Just the initials, H. Mind if I keep this? I asked quietly. The clerk shrugged. You paid your father's rent long enough. Guess it's yours by now. Outside, the wind off the harbor bit through my jacket. I turned the postcard over again, running my thumb along the edge. Something caught the light, faint pencil marks near the bottom corner, barely visible against the weathered paper. I held it closer to the sun. 3 words emerged in tiny scrawl. Ask Harper. The ink shimmered faintly like it wanted to be noticed. Whoever Harper was, they knew what Vivian didn't want anyone else to find. And now I had to find them. She didn't believe in luck, only evidence. Harper Dune's office looked like a crime scene museum. Files stacked to the ceiling, yellowed photos pinned to corkboards, a coffee mug that read, Trust no one. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and spoke like every sentence was an interrogation. So, she said, leaning back in her chair, your stepmother torched a will, and now you've got a postcard that basically says, Ask Harper. You're here because you think that's me. I nodded. Unless my dad knew another Harper who solves puzzles with fire. A corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like curiosity wrestling with disbelief. Edward Layton, she murmured, flipping open an old file on her desk. Your father called me once, years ago, said he was being followed. He wanted to secure something, documents maybe. My chest tightened. Did he say what it was? She shook her head. He never showed. Just paid a retainer and vanished. She reached for her coffee, took a sip, and added, You're lucky I keep records. Harper slid open a metal drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Layton, E. Inside were a few receipts, a blurred photocopy of an estate registry, and a note scribbled in my father's unmistakable handwriting. If anything happens to me, protect the frame. I frowned. The frame? That's what I thought, she said, standing. Come on. In her lab, a narrow room lined with microscopes and ultraviolet lamps, she set a small tray of burnt paper fragments on the counter. I pulled these from the fire report you mentioned, she said. Your father's studied debris. They're fragile, but let's see if they'll talk. She slid one under a thin sheet of heat-sensitive film, turned on a low warming light, and watched faint words reappear, letter by letter, like ghosts returning to finish their sentences. Vault, she read aloud softly. Under frame. I leaned closer. A vault? Under a frame? Harper nodded slowly. Could be architectural. Art piece, maybe. Did your father collect paintings? I laughed under my breath. Vivian did. My dad said art was expensive wallpaper, but he let her fill the mansion's gallery anyway. Then that's where we start. She shut off the lamp, grabbed her coat, and tossed me a pair of gloves. We're not leaving fingerprints on her lies. The mansion's gallery felt colder than I remembered, with all the ceilings, polished marble, and 100 eyes staring from painted portraits. Vivian's taste leaned toward vanity. Grand oil paintings of herself in different dresses, different seasons. Same smug smile. Harper's flashlight beam moved along the walls until it stopped on a large golden frame hanging crookedly, its canvas missing. Dust outlined where a painting used to be. "Looks like someone beat us to it," she said quietly. I stepped closer. The nails that once held the painting were bent. A faint square outline marked where something had been pried open behind it. And then I saw it. Fresh shoe prints in the dust. 2 sets. Whoever came for the vault wasn't done yet. It wasn't the art that was valuable. It was the dust behind it. The frame was heavier than it looked. Solid oak, carved with intricate vines that looked almost alive in the flashlight's beam. Harper braced it against the wall while I knelt behind, running my fingers along the plaster. Something clicked beneath the paint, hollow. "Hold that light steady," I said. I pressed my thumb along the edge, and a small panel slid open with a faint snap. Inside wasn't a vault full of gold or cash, just a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. Harper's brows lifted. "Blueprints?" I unfolded it carefully, dust falling in ribbons to the floor. It was an architectural drawing of the mansion, the kind contractors use, with measurements, walls, and annotations in faint pencil. But one corner had been torn off, and in the margins was a handwritten note. "Storage crawlspace beneath south wing foundation. 80. Harper whistled low. "Your dad hid something in the house itself." Before I could respond, the sound of heels echoed from the hallway. I froze. Harper's eyes narrowed. "Stay quiet," she mouthed. A woman's voice followed, smooth, clipped, and cold. "I thought I made myself clear, Ethan." Vivian stood in the doorway, flanked by her lawyer, Miles Thatcher, a man whose smile looked permanently rehearsed. "Breaking and entering," he said mildly, eyeing the open frame. "That's quite a statement for a grieving son." Vivian crossed her arms, diamonds catching the dim light. "You have no right to be here. This property's under probate." Harper stepped forward unflinching. "And yet your client's probate seems to include arson, theft, and perjury." Miles chuckled softly. "Miss Doone, is it? I'd suggest you stop digging before lawyers start digging back." "Is that a threat?" I asked. He adjusted his tie, smirked. "Just advice. Grief makes people imaginative." Vivian's gaze locked on the blueprint in my hand. "Whatever that is, it's meaningless. Edward kept junk everywhere. I folded it before she could reach for it. Funny, you didn't seem so dismissive when you tried to burn his office." Her face hardened, but Miles tugged her gently by the elbow. "Let's go, Vivian." We don't argue with the help. They left without another word. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the marble hall like a gavel. Harper exhaled slowly. "Well, congratulations. Now they know we found something." We left through the back door, taking only the torn blueprint. By the time I dropped Harper off, the sky had gone steel gray. I drove home with the folded paper tucked inside my jacket, my nerves on high alert. My apartment was dark when I arrived, too dark. I flicked on the light. The desk drawers were open. The lamp was knocked over. My computer screen flickered, half unplugged. I tore through the mess, heart pounding. Nothing else was missing. Not my wallet, not my watch, not even the cash I'd left in the drawer. Just the blueprint fragment. Someone had found me, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. The envelope was gone, but the stamp told a story. I'd gone back to the garage for air, or maybe answers. The smell of oil and metal always felt safer than silence. I was flipping through Dad's old service manuals when something slid loose and fluttered to the floor. A folded sheet of thick yellow paper. No envelope. Just a faded stamp torn off at the edge and a single line on the front. For H.D. My pulse quickened. Harper Doone. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Dad's, neat and precise, the kind of script born from drafting blueprints and signing contracts. "Harper, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. The records can't be trusted. The vault isn't safe anymore, nor are the people in charge of guarding it. I've left the key with Colt. You'll know what that means. Keep it out of Miles' hands. He'll sell what he can't steal. Harper, Colt, Miles. The names twisted together like wires sparking in my brain. I grabbed my phone and called Harper. "You need to hear this in person," I said. 20 minutes later, she was there, wind in her hair, jacket half-zipped, eyes sharper than headlights. I handed her the letter. Her expression changed as she read. "This is his handwriting," she said softly. He trusted me." "You worked for him?" I asked. She hesitated. "Sort of. Your father hired me under a non-disclosure contract. He suspected financial fraud in his company. Someone was moving assets through shell accounts. I was verifying internal transfers when he called it off suddenly." "Because of Vivian?" "Because of Miles," she said, tapping the line in the letter. "He was your father's legal partner before he married Vivian. But this," she pointed to the name Colt. "I don't know who that is." I frowned, scanning the shelves. Then I saw it. Dad's old pocket watch sitting on the workbench, the one he called Colt. He named everything mechanical, even time. Harper blinked. "Wait, that's Colt?" "Yeah, he said it was older than his marriage." I pried open the back with a screwdriver. Inside was a thin velvet lining and an empty slot that should have held something. Maybe a coin, maybe a key. But it was gone. "What kind of key?" I asked. "Safe deposit box," she said immediately. That's what he meant. It's the same thing mentioned in the burnt note. Vault, under frame, storage. He hid evidence in a bank box. I turned the watch over in my hand. The gears ticked faintly, steady and indifferent like time mocking us. Then Harper froze. "Ethan, look." Engraved along the inner lid, in perfect cursive, was a name I'd never seen before. Miles Kane. Not Thatcher, not the lawyer I'd met. Miles had another name, another identity, and maybe another reason to bury my father's truth. Some truths only come out when a man's conscience starts costing him sleep. Miles Kane, or whatever his real name was, lived in a world where every word had a price tag. His downtown office smelled like power and paper, the kind of place where guilt didn't survive long unless it paid rent. I didn't knock when I entered. The secretary tried to stop me, but one look at my face and she froze. Miles looked up from his desk, startled for only a second before his smirk returned. "Ethan," he said calmly, steepling his fingers. "You could have called. Saves you the drive and the theatrics." "I found the letter," I said, throwing the page across his desk. "The one Dad wrote to Harper. You remember her, the woman who actually believed in evidence." His eyes flicked down to the paper, then back up to me. "That letter doesn't prove anything." "No," I said quietly, "but your name in the pocket watch does." The smirk faltered. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks. "You've been busy." "Not as busy as Vivian," I said. "She's been meeting bankers. The same ones who handled my father's estate." That landed. His jaw tightened just enough to show the first crack. "You have no idea what you're walking into." Then enlighten me. For the first time since I'd known him, Miles looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from work, the kind that came from running out of lies. He rubbed his temples, sighed, and finally muttered, "She paid me." I blinked. "Vivian." He nodded. "After your father's accident, she came to me with an offer. Clear my debts, make my problems go away, and all I had to do was make sure the backup would never surface." I felt my stomach twist. "So you destroyed it." His silence was answer enough. "She said the original would hold," he continued bitterly. "But when the house fire happened, she panicked. Claimed the will was lost, but by then, it already was." I stepped closer. "You think a confession makes you clean?" "No," he said, opening a drawer and pulling out a sealed envelope. "But it might make me sleep again." Inside was a printed photo, grainy, time-stamped, taken from a security camera. Vivian stood in a hotel lobby wearing a white coat and sunglasses, shaking hands with a tall man in a banker's suit. "Who's he?" I asked. Miles hesitated. That's the part I couldn't figure out. The meeting took place after Colt's death, 2 weeks after, in fact. That shouldn't be possible if she'd already claimed all estate documents. I turned the photo over. On the back, faint pen markings, initials written in Harper's tight script, B. D. She frowned when she saw them. B.D., she said slowly. Your father's shorthand for backup document. I felt the chill settle in my bones. Vivian hadn't just faked the fire. She'd met someone to finish what had started. Every account leaves a ghost. Harper said it like a mantra as we sat in her car, engine idling outside an abandoned office park. The street signs had faded. The windows were boarded up. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. According to the records, Bennett Dorsey had once been a senior banker at Atlas Trust, the firm handling my father's estate. Now he didn't exist. His email bounced. His LinkedIn was deleted. His house sold for cash to an unknown buyer. But ghosts don't vanish completely, not when money's involved. Harper had found his name on a fragment of an old mailing list archived in the county clerk's database. One last trace, a donation to St. Gabriel's Church Fund. So we went there. The church was small and damp, the kind that still smelled of candle wax and rain. A priest greeted us with polite confusion until Harper showed her private investigator badge. He led us to a back office, dusty and dimly lit. Mr. Dorsey used to volunteer here, the priest said. Helped with the books. One day, he just stopped showing up. I scanned the room, ledgers, hymnals, and a stack of forgotten Bibles near the window. Something metallic gleamed between the pages of one. I picked it up. A business card. Bennett Dorsey, Senior Accounts Officer, Atlas Trust. But across the back, scrawled in pencil, were words that made my throat tighten. Meet at 7 Shutterlock Storage. Harper exhaled slowly. He left his own trail. We drove across town to the address, a long-forgotten industrial strip where broken neon signs buzzed faintly in the drizzle. The lot was empty except for one corrugated metal warehouse with faded lettering. Shutterlock Storage. The chain-link fence sagged. The padlock rusted beyond use. Harper snipped it cleanly with bolt cutters. Breaking into a crime scene no one knows exists, she muttered. My favorite hobby. Inside, the air smelled of wet concrete and old paint. Rows of storage units stretched into darkness, numbers half peeled from their doors. We found unit number 34, the one listed on Dorsey's old ledger. The padlock was gone, replaced by something worse. A heavy steel door welded shut. Harper ran her fingers along the seams. That's not vandalism. That's containment. Containment for what? I asked. She didn't answer. She just pointed her UV flashlight at the base of the door. A faint fingerprint pattern glowed, smeared, recent. Someone's been here, she whispered. And they didn't want anyone following. I crouched beside the safe door, tracing the welding marks. The initials BD had been scratched into the corner, almost hidden beneath rust. Before we could say another word, a faint echo of sirens cut through the rain. Harper froze. You hear that? Red and blue lights flared against the far wall through the cracks in the boarded windows. Police, she said. I stood up, heart pounding. How the hell? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. Enjoy your trespassing charge, Ethan. V. Vivian. She'd called the cops on me. And the woman who burned my father's will had just lit the next fire herself. They cuffed me for trespassing on my own father's secrets. The handcuffs clicked shut before I could even finish explaining. Cold steel, tight enough to make my wrists ache. The two officers didn't care that I was standing in front of a storage unit welded shut. To them, I was just another headline waiting to happen. D is graced air caught breaking into a state vault. By the time I was shoved into the back of the patrol car, the flashing lights had already drawn a small crowd. Phones were out. The cameras rolled. Somewhere between the flashing red and blue, I saw Harper's silhouette behind the police line. Calm, calculating, already plotting the next move. At the station, the interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and copy paper. A detective flipped through my file like it was an old menu. Ethan Layton, he said flatly. Caught breaking into private property registered under Shutterlock Storage, leased to a holding company owned by Vivian Layton. Care to explain? Yeah, I said. She's my stepmother, and she's lying through her perfect teeth. He raised an eyebrow. That so? Because she's on Channel 9 right now calling you a troubled young man who can't accept grief. My chest tightened. She's crying on camera, isn't she? He didn't answer, just slid a tablet across the table. The live feed showed Vivian dabbing fake tears with a silk handkerchief. I tried to help him, she said to the reporter. But ever since Edward's passing, Ethan's been unstable. I fear for him more than I fear for the inheritance. The room felt smaller. My jaw clenched. She's playing the victim. She's playing the audience, said a voice from the doorway. Harper stood there, calm as ever, a file folder in her hand. The detective sighed and left, muttering about her clearance credentials. Once the door shut, she pulled up a small cassette recorder from her bag. "Got something you need to hear," she said, pressing play. Static crackled, followed by a man's voice, nervous, hurried, unmistakably real. "Harper, it's Bennett Dorsey. If anything happens to me, the second will is stored where Colt first learned to balance the books. Don't let them find it first." Then silence. I leaned forward. "That was him?" She nodded. "I found his old answering machine in his church office. Took hours to restore the tape. Where Colt first learned to balance the books," I repeated. "What the hell does that mean?" Harper smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes right before lightning hits. "Think like your father. Colt wasn't just a name. It was his symbol. He named his watch after it. So, where would Colt have learned to balance anything? And then it hit me. "Accounting," I said quietly. "His high school accounting classroom." Harper nodded once. "Looks like class is back in session." I looked down at the cuffs around my wrists, the bruises already forming. The cops thought they'd caught a criminal. But all they'd done was put me one step closer to the truth my father died protecting. Some copies aren't paper, they're testimony. The flames had eaten half the room before the fire trucks even arrived. Vivian's mansion glowed like a dying sun on the hill, her empire of lies burning to ash. Harper and I watched from across the street, the night air thick with smoke and sirens. Everything we'd found, the notes, the maps, the proof, all gone in minutes. Or so I thought. Harper stood silent, her face lit orange by the firelight. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "That's it. It's all gone." She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, "No, not all of it." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small external drive, dented, smoke-stained, but intact. "I scanned the ledger fragment before we went to the house," she said. "Didn't tell you in case we got searched." I blinked. "You had it this whole time?" "I don't believe in luck," she said, a faint smirk cutting through the tension. "Only backups." We took it back to her office, plugging it into her old laptop. The screen flickered to life, pixelating for a moment before revealing a digital scan of the ledger fragment, the same one we'd seen in pieces days ago. But now, zoomed in and enhanced, words emerged in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Second will be certified. Backup copy filed under Registry 14592B. Colt is present for verification. Signed, Edward Layton." Below that line, a second scrawl, my father's handwriting this time. "If I'm gone, truth must have two witnesses. The paper and the person." Harper leaned back, exhaling. He didn't just store the will. He recorded a testimony, a legal statement written by Colt himself. "Then there's still proof," I said, my pulse quickening. "Registry number 14592B. That's the notary's archive. It's local." She was already on her feet. "Then we're going tonight." The notary's building stood dark at the edge of downtown, a narrow structure with marble pillars and glass doors chained shut. Harper picked the lock faster than I could blink. Inside, the smell of dust and ink hung heavy. The archive room stretched deep into the basement, rows of steel cabinets lining both walls, each drawer labeled with registry codes. 14592B, I muttered, running my hand along the sequence. 13589. 14590. Here. The drawer was half open. My stomach sank. Empty. Only a torn paper label dangled from the inside edge, half burned, the rest smudged with fingerprints. Harper lifted it under her flashlight. "It was checked out," she whispered. "By who?" She held the tag closer to the light. Scrawled in faint blue ink were two words and a signature line. "Detective Rojas." My throat went dry. Roja, the same detective who'd handled the fire. The one Vivian called a family friend. Harper looked up, her eyes sharp. He has the will. I clenched my fists. Then we're not asking for it. I stepped toward the door. We're taking it back. I didn't bring lawyers, I brought proof. The courtroom buzzed like a storm before lightning. Reporters packed the benches, cameras flashing in quick bursts. Every seat was filled, every whisper sharp enough to cut through my chest. At the center of it all sat Detective Rojas, the man who'd taken my father's truth and tucked it neatly into police evidence, like it was just another forgotten file. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Detective Rojas," he said, "you claim the document in question was seized from Bennett Dorsey's locker for safekeeping." Rojas nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor. I received a call from Mrs. Vivian Layton the night before the fire. She expressed concern about stolen estate materials. When I arrived at Shutterlock's storage, I found the document and took it into custody." "Ik insewe silin was ordindien." Harper leaned forward beside me, whispering, "He's twisting it. He didn't find it, he stole it." The judge's gaze moved toward us. "Mr. Layton, you and Miss Doone requested this hearing to present counter-evidence. You have the floor." I stood, the weight of every sleepless night pressing behind my ribs. "Your Honor, the detective's testimony doesn't explain why the document was never entered into evidence, or why my stepmother had it locked in a private storage vault instead of submitting it to probate." Vivian, seated in her pristine white suit, smiled just enough for the cameras. "Because there was nothing to submit, Ethan. That document is a forgery." Her lawyer rose, waving a stack of papers. "We have handwriting inconsistencies to support that claim." The judge looked to Harper. "Ms. Doone, your response?" Harper stepped forward, calm and clinical. "Your Honor, before the fire, I made high-resolution scans of the document. Within those scans, we found marginal notes written in the same ink as the primary will, notes signed C.L. for Colt Layton." She opened a folder, revealing a close-up printout. "Here's the note in question, and here," she said, holding up a second page, "are mortgage deeds signed by Colt himself 30 years ago, held by the county archives." The handwriting matches stroke for stroke. Even the pressure points align. The courtroom murmured. The judge motioned to the forensic analyst seated near the witness stand. "Confirm or deny, please." The analyst examined both documents under a magnifier, tracing the loops and curves. Ink composition, handwriting style, and signature pattern, all authentic. No signs of duplication or overlay. Vivian shot to her feet, her voice cracking. "This is nonsense. That document was never filed. My husband would never." The judge slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Layton, sit down." But she didn't. Her face went pale, eyes unfocused. She clutched the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her upright. "Vivian," her lawyer whispered. Her knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor as the courtroom erupted, reporters shouting, the judge calling for recess, officers rushing to her side. Harper leaned toward me, her voice low but steady. "She knows it's real." I stared at the fallen woman who'd burned my father's legacy to protect her lie. The truth had just burned her back. The same fire she started ended up lighting my way. 3 months later, the courthouse steps felt lighter beneath my feet. The trial was over. The verdict was public. And the woman who had burned my father's will was now serving time for fraud, obstruction, and destruction of estate property. Vivian Layton didn't look at me once when the sentence was read. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe the version of herself she'd tried to sell to the world, the grieving widow, the misunderstood matriarch, had burned away with the lies she built her fortune on. I stood outside the courthouse as flashes went off, microphones pushed in my face. "Mr. Layton, what will you do with the inheritance?" I could have said I'd rebuild, invest, start over, but the truth was simpler. "I'm not keeping all of it," I said quietly. "Half will go to the Edward Layton Foundation, to fund scholarships in mechanical trades and financial literacy for underprivileged kids." My father believed knowledge should be the only thing inherited without limit. Harper stood a few feet behind me, her hands in her jacket pockets, a faint smirk ghosting her lips as the cameras swarmed. She hated publicity, but she stayed until the last reporter left. When the crowd finally thinned, I turned to her. "You saved me more times than I can count," I said. She shrugged. "You didn't need saving, Ethan. You just needed someone to remind you what was worth fighting for." I smiled. "You could have walked away." "Yeah," she said softly, looking toward the courthouse doors. "But then who would have proven me right?" We both laughed quietly, the kind that comes when the storms finally passed. Later that evening, I drove to what was left of the mansion. The fire had reduced it to a skeleton of stone and ash. The police tape still fluttered against the wind. I stepped over it, walking through the ruins until I reached what used to be my father's study. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and rain. Among the debris, I found something small, elted piece of metal, the edge of an old fountain pen, half burned but still engraved with his initials. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the cool weight against my skin. He'd always said ink outlasts memory. He was right. Even after everything burned, the truth was still her, carved, etched, waiting. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the sky turned the same shade of gold that used to shine off his workshop tools. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything, not to him, not to Vivian, not to anyone. I was finally free, because money can be burned. Truth can't. It waits in copies, in conscience, in people brave enough to look for it. Subscribe for more real justice stories like this one.